Today, I have the absolute honor of sitting with a therapist I deeply, deeply admire, Dr. Martha Sweezy. Her work has profoundly impacted my own healing journey and has deeply influenced the way I support my clients. Every word she writes resonates with truth, insight, and compassion, and continues to shape the heart of the work I do. Martha is an assistant professor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, a research and training consultant at the Center for Mindfulness and Compassion, and a leading voice in internal family systems therapy. She is also the author and co-author of 8 extraordinary books, including the one we'll be discussing today, Internal Family Systems for Shame and Guilt. In this conversation, we gently enter the terrain of shame and guilt, those quiet, often hidden forces that shape how we see ourselves and relate to the world. Martha invites us to look beneath the surface, to understand how these burdens form, how they become protected by powerful parts of us, and how they can begin to soften when met with presence, patience, and compassion. We speak about the identities we carry that were never truly ours, the wounds passed down through generations, and the tender courage it takes to turn inward. What in internal family systems is known as a U-turn. Martha also shares a deeply important distinction between empathy and compassion, and helps us see the vital role protectors play in helping us survive what once felt unbearable. Together, we explore how healing unfolds not through force or fixing, but through the quiet return to self. That unshakable presence within us that is clear, kind, and connected. This is the conversation for anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by their inner world. My hope is that you will find resonance, softness, and perhaps even a new way of being with yourself. Let's begin. Martha, welcome to your Soul's Therapist podcast. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course, the topic that we're going to discuss with you today will be our focus, your beautiful work of art. I don't know how long it took you to do this, but this is my Bible.
Thank you.
Every page I could read many, many times, and still I keep getting a lot of insights from it. So I will keep sitting with it.
Tell people what it is. The name of the book?
Yes, Internal Family Systems for Shame and Guilt.
Yeah.
Yes. That actually something that it wasn't in my awareness until I found this book. And in level 1, for example, training, it's not the topic we opened up or looked at. And then when I discovered your work, it opened a lot for me, and it helped so much in my practice and, of course, in my own process, in my own therapy. So thank you for this body of work, first of all.
Yeah, thank you.
And to begin with, you mentioned in your book something that you call dual consciousness. So for us to start having an idea of what is dual consciousness and what is IFS, and connection between IFS and the idea of dual consciousness, if you don't mind.
I can't remember exactly what the context was in which I talked about dual consciousness. You want to remind me?
Yeah, it's the beginning, it's the goal, and the idea of parts and self.
Yeah. Okay. So my conception of what's going on after getting trained in IFS and sort of exploring that perspective with clients and in myself is that we have, I mean, there are meditators who would probably say there are many layers or forms of consciousness that you can access. And what I believe we're accessing in IFS is whatever they are, parts, what we call parts, and what Dick Schwartz, who founded IFS, calls sacred inner beings, and also this other form of consciousness, which people generally say, well, that's me, that's myself. So Dick used that term, self, and not in the mundane sense, but in a sense of a form of consciousness that's very centering, in which we access a lot of very beneficial qualities, not least curiosity and compassion. And that when people can access those two things internally, it's not hard to access parts. All you have to do is pay attention internally, and you can start interacting with your parts. One part of me wants to have a sandwich, another part of me wants to go swimming. Okay, I can talk to those two parts, and sort of negotiate with them about who's going to get what. And so that's all day long, right? We have parts who are in charge of getting us up and going to work, and we would call those parts managers. And manager parts are quite protective of our social standing and our social connectivity, and they want us to belong and be valued socially and whatnot. And so we rely a lot on our managers, right, for functioning. And we're trying to get our kids as they grow up to have some good managers so that they can get out the door and get to school and get home and stuff like that. And when we get hurt as children, particularly when we're most vulnerable in life, if the injury is something to do with our identity, I am not good enough, I am not included, there's something shameful or wrong or bad about me, which happens to all kids, then the managers try to handle that danger. It's a social danger to have something wrong or unacceptable about me. And managers often do that in an escalating way with internal shaming. So they become sort of critical parts internally. And when that goes, we can only handle so much criticism, right? It's a very inhibitory behavior. And so ultimately it's depressing. It may allow you to belong better or to be safer in some given context, but it's also at the expense of your spontaneity, your curiosity, your engagement, your sense that it's okay to not be perfect, and all the things that kids naturally have in terms of wanting to explore and find out about life, and their creativity and all that become gradually inhibited with this internal shaming and trying to belong. So ultimately, then there are parts who rebel against that. And so we call those parts the managers who try to make us good, and the parts who start to rebel against that because it can feel so bad sometimes to try to be good. We call them protectors because they're trying to balance things out and make life livable and make sure that you're included and that you have enough relief from internal shaming. So that's a kind of overall picture of what's going on with parts when there's trouble in life. And then there's this other consciousness, right, which is called self and in IFS, but it's also called in esoteric religions, various things like Buddha mind or Atman, whatever. And so though that the resources from that form of consciousness get kind of pushed out of mind if there's a lot of internal constraint and efforts to inhibit parts who would be more joyful and exploratory and free, right? And so what we're doing in IFS is trying to get uh, sort of parts to calm down enough to allow more of that other form of consciousness back into the picture, because that's, that's what gives us a balanced life. It's like if we can get the bird's eye view of the form of consciousness that is centered and sort of wise um, and takes in the bigger picture, then we have a system internally that can balance itself, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this very beautiful and clear explanation of how this relationship between self and parts work, and also what are the parts and what is their function. And it's already starting to give us so much depth of understanding of ourselves, because if we don't have this map and an explanation to what side of us, why this side of us is like this, why this side of us is like that, it's just one big soup, and emotions and feelings take over one after another, and it's just a mess, and it's overwhelming and challenging to live in this soup of feelings. So thank you for creating space between them and explaining the reason and the mission. And of course, I had flashbacks of my childhood right now of being shamed for being shameless.
Right, exactly. Heaven forbid a child should be shameless, right? Yeah.
Yeah. How is this possible? I still do, but my parts already don't buy that.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Would you agree that the more challenging our experience was, the more parts would be around?
Well, not exactly. No, I think parts come on developmentally throughout life, and we have uh, in some way potentially an infinite number of parts because if you get into it, parts have parts, right? And so it's sort of a fractal arrangement. But you don't have to worry about that. That's not a problem. What you do find um, in therapy, at least, or if somebody is in distress, is that there's a sort of a little beehive of parts that are circulating around a problem. And that problem is some experience of having felt I'm not acceptable or I'm not okay, which can have come from an extremely traumatic experience, interpersonal or accidental or illness or, something that was interrupted a kind of safe flow of life. Or it can be something that other people wouldn't particularly notice. I mean, there's things in childhood all the time that occur, which some kids are temperamentally, I think, more vulnerable to than other kids. So and they may be more vulnerable biologically, they may be more vulnerable temperamentally. So there's a lot of ways in which things fall on different kids differently. And so one of the things I love about IFS is that it's very experience near. We just stay with this individual's. We have this kind of blueprint for how the mind works, but we're sticking very close to this individual's experience, which is unique. and exploring it within that kind of model of mind.
That beautifully transitions me to my next question, which is a little bit of magic. And I was very happy to find a lot of magical moments in this book. I felt like I'm transported actually somewhere into like a Harry Potter kind of place where, like you're saying, bending the time, rescripting the past, rehearse the future,
Mhm.
how that all happens in IFS therapy. How do we bend the time and change the
Well,
past?
yeah, I mean, here's the thing, and I think where Harry Potter comes from, and all these wonderful books that for kids, is that the subjective universe is has a different set of rules than objective life externally, and so internally parts, while they appear to be people often, not always, but a little someone will say, well, this is a 5-year-old part of me who looks like a little girl or a little boy, and so or child, and and that child is looks, fully human, right? But it's a part, it's not exactly a person. And so that part can travel around in time. This is a feature of subjective experience, right? We can move into the past, we can project into the future. Um, and that part can shift shape. So often, in the beginning, someone will say, well, this part is showing up like a storm, it's just a big tornado inside me. And then gradually, as you talk to the part, it will devolve into a kid who's having a strong feeling. So the tornado was sort of a way the child the part was expressing its or showing in a metaphoric way how it feels. Um, and so there's all kinds of, literature comes out of our minds, right? And that's the realm in which all these things are possible that we can't do externally. It's not magic there. It's just how it works.
Yes, it's like this inner verse. And with many, many years of doing different types of spiritual work, I thought that I've seen everything, but not until I started going into my universe and just saying hello to different aspects of me that I found in the corners of that universe, things that I could never possibly imagine exist. And I was
Right,
so happy I found them and I supported them and I was there for them. So
right.
this is very interesting modality. And I always ask therapists of your caliber, what about your skeptical parts when you discovered IFS model? What your
Hmm.
skeptical parts were telling you?
Well, I came to IFS in, I think it was 2005. I went and saw Dick Schwartz give a little talk and he showed a video in Harvard Square in the basement of a church on the Cambridge Common. And he wasn't that well known at the time, and he was going around talking about his work. And I had worked for many years in a community mental health psychiatry department, where we saw people with all kinds of people with all kinds of terrible trauma. And uh, so I had sort of and it was a Harvard teaching hospital. So there were a lot of opportunities for people giving interesting talks and taking free courses, and so I had spent a whole bunch of years studying a lot of different things to try and see what would be most useful. And so I didn't come to this, out of the blue. I came to it as a kind of seeker of more ideas because many things seemed helpful, nothing seemed adequate to me. And so I was not that skeptical. I was more blown away by what I saw him doing. And I didn't understand it. I went up to him at a break and I said, what is dissociation? And he said, that's a part. And I was like, I can't calculate this. I don't understand what you're talking about. But I saw what he had done in this video, and I thought, whatever he just did, that's what I want to learn because I just had a sense that's going to be a golden key to put together a lot of the things that I have noticed and learned. But it's like a puzzle that hadn't come together yet. While um, I'm sure I had some parts who were skeptical along the way because I don't think I was very, I mean, I was a beginner. I was a learner in the beginning and I would do things that I was springing this model on people in who would come to see me. They had never heard of it. They had no idea what I was talking about. And I would go too fast sometimes, and I wasn't respectful enough with protective parts. And so there were many ways in which I, as a student, was sort of copying what I saw without knowing what I was doing and really being attuned to the systems and the needs of the people I was. But they taught me, they'd be like, parts will do that. They'd be like, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. And so when it doesn't work, you learn what you're doing that isn't effective or isn't acceptable to the
And I'm
person.
curious, how did it slowly took you to this area of expertise that you are focusing and wrote such a beautiful piece on?
Well, that's an interesting question. I had gotten interested in the topic of shame and guilt right at the beginning of being in school to become a psychotherapist. That those two uh, emotions stood out to me right from the beginning as essential. As soon as I started basically sitting with people and listening to them talk, uh, I recognized that this was a powerful operating force in a lot of problems that people were presenting to me. And so it wasn't like I hadn't thought about it before. Judy Herman was on the staff at the hospital where I worked, and she has written, and she and her mother had written a lot about shame. And I had the opportunity to hear her teaching over a number of years. So it wasn't new to me. I didn't quite understand it. So I was watching, I guess, as I learned IFS, as I listened to my own parts, as I listened to people who were doing their own inquiries and explorations. I had it in mind, but I hadn't put it together. But I'm a writer also, so I'm constantly sitting down and kind of trying to articulate what I'm learning by putting it into writing. That's how I learn best. And so I've been doing that. I started with articles that were published in 2009 and 2010, I think. And then when I sat down, when the pandemic hit, basically I said to myself, here's the opportunity, just write that book. It's now or never. And I felt finally I was prepared. I had enough, uh, I had enough case experience to talk about all the different aspects of things that I had been, learning and taking notes on over the course of 15 years, basically.
Thank you for that. Thank you for doing this body of work. And I honestly do not hear much content, much, education on these topics. And I recognize that in my practice, this is one of the most underlying themes of any sort of sense of not being well.
You mean shame?
Yes, shame.
Either? Yeah.
Primarily, second would be guilt, which I had no idea really about. It was kind of always this shame and guilt. They're hiding. They know really, really well how to hide. It's almost I see them as like this parts that just want to run away, escape. The moment you come a little bit closer to that topic, to this energy, right? Or a part that holds shame, the system just sets up a lot of protection or distraction, or parts take over. And it's almost like a place you cannot go, you shouldn't go, no one should open that door. It's prohibited, it's hidden, it's a secret. And that's what keeps a lot of people very stuck in their healing process, and in the patterns that they actually really want to resolve within themselves. So it was such an awakening to me, finally, to put what I was always kind of tapping into, but I just couldn't grasp it properly or find a proper name to it. And finally, it was, I got this word. And I also found it, of course, immediately in my own therapy. And it just was this eye-opening experience of everything clicked. And I found so many answers to why, why I am the way I am, or other, people dealing with what they're dealing with. And I really like the description of this. Shame is like corrosive to the sense of worth. And that's kind of to the sense of our identity, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is what Dick Schwartz called initially, when he learned about it, exiled parts. The parts who, and these are the sort of part, I don't know if you're familiar with that, um, uh, what is his name? The children's book writer, Dr. Seuss. That there's a whole pile of turtles, Yertle the turtle, and there's a turtle at the bottom, little turtle at the bottom of this pile. And the exile is kind of like the little turtle at the bottom of the pile. So in IFS, you start off talking with the protectors, right? And you don't go to the turtle at the bottom of the pile until you get their permission. They have to climb off and say, okay, we're willing to we're willing to allow this thing that has frightened us so much to be exposed. And so you have to form a relationship with these protective parts to calm them down from that fear that you're describing, which is that there is something fundamentally unacceptable and wrong and worthless and unlovable here. And we're not letting anyone get anywhere near it, because that's the end. That's not, you can't be included, you can't belong if you're like that. So that's why these parts who have been shamed get banished, basically. The effort of protectors is to keep them banished from consciousness. I don't know about them, and you're certainly not going to know about them, and we don't have to talk about them, and we never have to see them again. But in fact, that's not how it works inside. Parts don't disappear just because they've been insulted, right? It's like putting children in a closet in the basement and saying, well, just shut up and see you later. It doesn't work. So they're constantly getting out of the closet at any opportunity, because they want, they long, they need to be recognized, to be validated, to have that sort of curse taken off them. They need to be included And they're often developmentally very young, so they're children who need to be, nurtured and cared for and sort of allowed to exist as children need to. They need to play, they need to explore. And if you have done that with your most sort of joyful exploratory parts, lock them in the basement, then they're gonna be like screaming in the background while you have managers and sort of reactive, rebellious protectors trying to go on with life and act as if there's nobody screaming from the basement, right? And so they'll do that with all their skills, and protectors are very skilled often. They will, get you to work. They'll get you home, get you a big glass of wine, turn the TV on, make sure you're distracted, make sure you're soothed, make sure you're functional, make sure you belong, until it becomes too much and you fall off a cliff. Something big happens that's not in your control, and those parts can't manage it anymore. And the parts in the basement do a jailbreak, and they come up, and you feel overwhelmed with these feelings of fear and shamefulness and despair and loneliness. And there's kind of an existential crisis of can I live like this? And suicide parts will come up, and those reactive, rebellious parts will start doing things like drinking more heavily. And so things can go off the rails. It's a fragile arrangement, and not a good long-term one, and not one that allows us to be happy and present
Yeah.
and creative,
Yes, it is. And I also discovered that parts of us that holding shame are protected by really intense, strong, powerful parts, protectors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if you could kind of just give a little overview of which type of protectors you usually meet that are kind of keeping closed and protected and hiding those parts that are shameful.
Yeah. Um, Almost anything. Protectors can do all kinds of, that's what I was saying. They're skillful. They pick up all kinds of tricks and tactics along the way. Whatever works in the short run, to cause you to stay socially embedded and feel like you belong, or on the other hand, to soothe distress in an emergency moment. Those are the tactics they will use. They're not going for long-term, they don't know how to handle longer term, they don't have a big horizon for, is this tactic I'm using right now going to actually be functional and helpful down the road? No, but they don't have any alternative, right? So that's why we want this other resource, which is wiser, more, I guess you could say adult, although a lot of adults don't act particularly with great wisdom, but ideally the broader perspective of an adult, and the kind of wisdom of the bird's eye view, and the compassion that and the kindness that yourself can bring to your parts, is a way of sort of rebalancing a very unbalanced situation when parts are on their own.
And in your experience, what is really truly healing for parts that carry the feeling I'm not lovable, there's something wrong with me, I'm not okay, I'm bad, I'm wrong?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because people come into therapy often with manager parts, get them into therapy, unless they're mandated by somebody else's managers, right? They come to therapy. And so let's say it's someone who's come on their own, not someone who's going to be rebellious because somebody else has told them to come, but they come on their own and uh, they want change. That's what they come in saying. I want, and you're the designated helper for change. You're supposed to help them change. And what the secret, sort of formula there for a manager is you're going to help me fix that unacceptable, unlovable part of me so that I don't have this problem anymore. And we in IFS, we're saying, nah, we're not signing on for that. Actually, that's not the deal here. We want to find out what's so scary about you, the manager part, what you're worried about. And we want to offer you an alternative. And we want to offer those rebellious parts an alternative, which is not to fix and not to silence these parts who have been locked up in the basement, but to get them out of the basement and liberate them. They don't have to change. There's nothing wrong with them. They got hurt and they need kindness and love and caring. And you're not responsible for that. You guys who've worked so hard, you've done a great job of surviving. And now, there's a parent kind of in town who can take over here. Yourself can be the good parent for you guys as well as for the parts you've been trying to protect all these years with your short-term tactics that cause long-term problems. We're kind of done with that model. And it's not about change, it's about bringing sort of acceptance and love into this system that's been so harsh with itself, and rearranging the hierarchy of who takes care of who. In other words, a grown-up is going to take care of children now instead of children trying to take care of a grown-up.
Yeah. And, as you talk, I sense that very few people have been modeled how to express compassion, acceptance, and love to themselves, which is why believe in this culture of let's self-love, let's fix it, let's self-love. And sometimes it's not actually the self-love, it's more actually fixing.
Right. Right.
So my question to you is, if the person has never had an experience of anyone in his life, of someone just genuinely expressing compassion, expressing kindness,
Right.
the system has no idea what is this, can I even do this to this part? Like, I don't know how to do it. It doesn't make sense. I've never tasted it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are people who have had extremely traumatic lives who have not had any adult available to them in any system that they were in, school, sort of the religious community, if they had one, their home that was safe. It's not always, it's more rare. Usually people have some, like I had a fifth grade teacher who loved me and was sweet to me, or I had a grandma or grandpa or somebody, right? But there are people who can't name that. And it doesn't mean that they're without this internal resource, but it does mean that their protective system is going to be often very worried about whether it's okay to be close to anybody. And those folks often will have a cat or a dog or a grandchild or a child or a niece or nephew or somebody, some friend's kid who they actually feel they can open their heart to, and they feel, and because that there's an innocence there, and they get the open heart in return. The child approaches them with an open heart, or the cat is always available, or whatever. So it's not like they don't have the experience. I have not met anybody who hasn't found a way to get that experience. in their life. People are desperately need it and they find ways, but their systems are very guarded about who they're allowed to have that exchange with. So, you know, the more guarded the system, the more slowly you have to approach. If some part got them into therapy, that doesn't mean other parts trust you or want to be there or think it's safe to do this. And they're probably extremely wary of the whole thing. So you have to be, it's like if you went knocking on a stranger's door and they said, "Sure, come on in." Well, you're still a stranger when you get in the house. You have to figure out, maybe you're in a different culture and you don't even know how to be polite. What am I supposed to do here? You have to be very observant and thoughtful and listen carefully and ask questions and not make assumptions and do all those things that we know how to do socially. We know how to behave. We don't always do it, but we know we're humans. We know what causes other humans to feel safe and unsafe. And the same is true internally. We have to tread uh, with kindness and care and concern. Um, and one of the things that I do talk about in the book is that there's a difference between empathy and compassion, and there's a lot of sort of promoting of the idea in our culture and in the therapy world that empathy is the key to doing well in sort of connecting with other people. And I disagree with that. It's not, I mean, I think empathy is important and wonderful. Empathy is, I feel with you, right? And a woman named Tanya Singer, who's a researcher in Germany, did a study in which she discovered, to her surprise, that with an MRI study, that empathy uses neural pain pathways, goes along neural pain pathways in the brain. So if you're in pain and I'm empathizing, I'm feeling pain. I'm feeling your pain. So I can connect with you. It's important to be able to do that. But young parts can get very swamped by that. So they need the context of, what in IFS, what we call self, the self energy, the energy of that other kind of consciousness. They need the energy of compassion, which is I feel for you. And compassion actually lights up neural reward pathways in the brain. So empathy needs to be contained within this greater experience of compassion. If you are, this is where therapists burn out, is if they are just sort of focusing on feeling with somebody else and it's their parts who are doing it. They will have protective parts who come in finally and say, "Okay, enough of that. That's intolerable. This person is swamping you. You can't help them. Get rid of them, dump them, find some way to get out of this." Right? So when therapists act out, it's a problem of not having enough access to compassion and having too much focus on empathy and sort of parts led interactions with their clients.
I completely agree with you. And doing healing work for many years, I definitely started with empathy, which definitely traumatized me. And
Right.
IFS taught me compassion, which interestingly enough, right, Buddhist tradition talks all the time about compassion, but I couldn't never get it
Right.
until my journey with IFS, and it changed everything. And interesting that when I was speaking about parts that holding that sense of shame, and their system is very new to the feeling of compassion. There is no parts, or their self is not there yet to offer that compassion. It's almost like they start learning to walk for the first time, of
Right.
relating with the exiles from a place of compassion. It feels like the therapist first can kind of model a little bit that how that could look like.
Right.
And then they kind of learning how to be compassionate
Well, let
to
me
themselves.
actually say that a slightly different way, because I don't think people have to learn to be compassionate. What we find in IFS is that if we get parts to, if we can persuade parts to do what we call unblending, which just basically means differentiating or separating, it's a very important but kind of funny phenomenon that is essential to this approach to therapy is that when we get into relationship with parts, what we're doing is convincing them to stop taking over, as we say, or overwhelming. And a metaphor that suits me well in terms of thinking of how this works is a stage. So if you have, it's a theatrical metaphor, if you have a part who keeps running onto the stage and getting in the spotlight and yelling and jumping up and down, and the other parts come out and start yelling, I want the spotlight, get off, get out of here, and then they can get into arguments. There's the director who's sitting out in the audience saying, hey guys, stop it. I want some balance here. I want you to take turns. No one's listening, right? They're not paying attention. It's kind of chaotic, as you described in the beginning. There's a sense that this is chaos. It's actually not chaos because the parts who are running on stage trying to take over the spotlight have a mission and a motive. And their motive is that they don't want those exiled parts to come out on stage and be expressing their feelings or talking about what happened to them. But it looks like chaos and it feels chaotic and pointless. So it's a big distraction from the real thing, the real problem, which is that underlying emotional pain and the identity problem of I am worthless. But all of this is just looks like it's anarchy, right? And what we're trying to do is get everyone, sit everyone down on the stage and say, hey guys, there is a director over here. There's someone out here who can really help you with balance and everyone getting a turn to speak, and also can get that little part who you're so worried about out on stage and take care of that part and let it speak and let it tell its story and let it feel its feelings safely and everyone's going to be safe with this. We can do this in a measured, careful way, addressing everybody's concerns. Do it at your pace, but we got to do it. This chaos is just causing everyone to feel worse, and nobody's getting what they really want out of this. So there's another way, and that's the self is the director who's sitting out, in the audience saying, hey, I'm here and I'm always here. The director isn't, you don't need to learn to find the director is always available. Self is always there. Self has all this compassion for the parts who are running around on the stage. Like there's no tomorrow. And what we're trying to do is convince them to see that this other option is available right now, right here, if they are willing to try doing something new.
Thank you for catching the word learn. Definitely my manager.
Yeah.
And thank you for reminding about the fact that the self just knows already. It's kind of inbuilt wisdom, inbuilt ability to be compassionate. It's a really magical, special energy of compassion. It's just there. It's a quality of the self. And the question how to unblend from parts who just want to get rid of someone or the one that is shameful, etc., right? So that self can just actually flood in the compassion into the room. And thank you, Martha.
Yeah, and I think it's not. I mean, sometimes once you get to know your parts and they know you being self, then you can be quite firm with them, like, no, I really need you to not do that right now. But until they're willing to cooperate, then we're not in charge of them, right? We can't control parts. So it's they're the ones who are doing the unblending, and we are the ones who are saying, look, we're here, self is over here. I'm here to help with this. We're right here. If you guys are willing to try something new, we'll show you how much better this will feel. But it's up to you. You're the boss. We can't control you because protected parts will react really badly to any notion, any sense they have that someone is trying to control them, because that was what was bad in the first place. That's why they had to get to work.
Yeah. Shamers.
Mm.
I know we are kind of close to the time, but I cannot not ask you about the parts that are actually doing the shaming internally. And this is a tough experience when there is internalized part that is doing the shaming.
Mm.
And I'm curious if in your experience, it is a part that is more kind of a legacy burden, or it is a protector.
Mm. Well, parts are a burden is a burden. A burden is a belief, that's toxic in some way for one's identity, or it's a stuck feeling state that a part can't get out of. And a legacy burden is like something inherited from that comes down the family line. And there's a ton of that. We have legacy gifts, legacy burdens, we learn within the context of the systems that we grow up in, our family, our culture, our school, religion, whatever. All those are systems that we are inducted into as children. We're inducted into the beliefs of those systems. And then we sometimes later on just keep on believing them. Sometimes we question them, but we're all given beliefs with which to navigate life and make sense of experience. And what was your original question? You said
How to approach parts that are doing the shaming.
right. Okay. So parts who are doing the shaming um, have picked that up often from their environment, and it may be at home, may be outside of home, but it is a learned option that is quickly effective in terms of controlling somebody else, right? Because nobody wants to feel shameful. So if someone shames you, if it lands, if it doesn't land, if someone shames you for something like, your family, all your family has curly hair and other people don't have curly hair, and you go to school and the kids shame you for that, but you go home and the parents are like, oh, no, don't pay any attention to that, you're fine, and the kid believes it, then it's not going to land, it's not going to become a burden, right? But if that child has nobody, no backup basically to reassure them that the shaming was not a truth about them, then they'll have parts who take it on and say, oh, okay, everybody with curly hair is inferior. I get it. So now we have to do something about that. And they might start kid might start to pull their hair back and straighten it or whatever. I'm someone with curly hair, so I'm just using this as an example because I did that as a child. I pulled, not as a child, but when I was preteen and teen, I would pull my hair back in a ponytail and try and make it straight and whatnot, because it was the in thing to have straight hair at the time. And so my protectors would get to work trying to make me acceptable and belong and fitting in. And so I didn't stand out. I didn't have something that was different about me. And so those parts would have to shame me for the whatever age I was first when someone made fun of me for having curly hair. would have to say to that part of me, you don't stand up for yourself with your curly hair. Don't enjoy that. Just shut up and go into the basement because we're going to start trying to straighten your hair out. Um, right? And that happens, with so many different things in different environments for children, right?
This is how
And
we start changing ourselves all the time to adapt and trying different styles and trying different ways of behaving and trying to find what lands so that.
yeah, the entire fashion industry is based on our desire to fit in and belong with the latest. What's the latest thing that everybody else is wearing? I think I'll try that. Right? I don't want to look out different. I don't want to stand out. I want to be the best example of what everybody's doing. And that's just a human, group. We're group animals. We go and we try to belong to groups naturally. And it's a survival. It's an important survival skill. Um, so
But then there is this like a cycle, right? There is a shamer that is doing the shaming. The part that feels already not acceptable, not lovable, feels the shame, and it
right.
triggers other parts, and it just becomes this really challenging roller coaster of parts taking over one after another.
Right. So if it lands, if the shaming lands as an insult that in some way is taken in as an identity, there is something about me, not something I did, but about me, my essence, that is not going to be acceptable, then I have a burden. It's an identity burden, right? And you had mentioned legacy burdens. Well, legacy burdens can be shared with children. A burden, say, my mother had something terrible happen to her, and I see that she's afraid of dogs. And I don't know what happened to her. She's not telling me that story, but I see her fear of dogs. And I pick up from her because she's my cue about what's safe and what isn't. I pick up a fear of dogs. So I have a fear of dogs that is more about my loyalty to her and my belief that she knows what's good and what isn't good. And it's not really about my direct experience with dogs. I don't have that because she keeps them away from me, right? So I now have a legacy, so-called legacy or inherited burden that has quite a different meaning than hers. Her burden is personal. She got bitten by a dog, and as a child, and she's scared of dogs. Nobody protected her. It means all kinds of things to her, like no one valued me enough to keep me away from that dog, or the world is unsafe, or whatever she feels. But I, as her child, just feel like I'm a loyal, trusting, good child who's going to trust my mother if she says dogs aren't safe. I'm not going to challenge that because that would be silly, right? I need to know how to navigate in the world safely, and she's going to tell me. She's my protector. So I'm good. She has an experience of I'm in danger. I'm not worthwhile enough to be safe in the world. And I have an experience with that inherited burden of I'm good and I'm loyal and I'm safe, right? As long as I stick to that belief. If I don't challenge that belief, right? Later on, I may have to, and it may be hard to relearn because I'll feel that I'm being disloyal to my mother and abandoning her if I decide I have to figure out how to get along with dogs, right? So it'll be an emotional challenge for me to do that, but it'll be worth it because the world is full of dogs or whatever. So as an adult, I'll decide that I have to go to therapy and do something about my fear of dogs, right? But it will be a challenge to my sense of being a good person, a good loyal person who protects my mother. And that's kind of the difference between legacy burdens and personal identity burdens. A personal identity burden is a challenge to my sense of goodness and my identity as a good person. even if it's from an accident that happened, to be like, why didn't God love me enough to protect me from falling off that cliff or whatever? But a child who is being loyal to an adult with their burden and is recruited into the position of taking care of their fear and identifying with them is having a very different experience. And both are true all the time, right? We all have these inherited burdens, we all have inherited gifts, and we all have personal burdens based on our personal experience. So again, it's really important to just be experience near with people and find out where stuff came from. How'd you learn this? What was important about it? What would happen if you let it go? People will often say in the beginning, well, this is just how I have always thought about this. This is my habit. And this is the way we do things in my family. And that so they have a part who believes that is immovable. And if I say, yeah, but that could change in a second if you decide that you don't want to believe it anymore. But we need to help the part who thinks it's important to believe this before it will let that go.
Yeah.
People are much more flexible than they give themselves credit for being, if they are ready to let go of something because they see it as not useful anymore.
Yeah, it's the moment of showing that there is option to choose something else,
Right.
and
And
address
being
that
willing,
with parts.
yeah, I always say, is the part just willing to try something new? Can always go back. We're not taking something away here. We're just adding an option. And, the goal here is not to take anything away from your parts, but to give them options because they're very afraid of their power being taken away. So it's really important to say, you're the boss. You can go back to this if you want, but try something new for a minute and see how it feels, see how it suits. And if we need to adjust it, we can adjust it. It's really up to you. So I'm constantly saying you're in charge here. But do you really want to stick with this way of doing things that's so energy intensive and ineffective at this point? Often parts, the other thing we haven't talked about is parts can be literally stuck in the past so that they aren't aware of the present. So they're sort of living in a different time loop and they're behaving as if everybody in the present is somebody from the past. And so updating them is extremely liberating for them, gets them out of having to do things to be safe in an environment that is quite safe now. If it's not safe, that's harder. If someone's in an environment that isn't safe in the present, you can still do it, but you have to acknowledge that the present is not safe and that they have to navigate danger in the present as well as danger in the past.
Yes. Thank you for this in detail and in-depth understanding and clarification. And I know we're just a little bit over time, but if I may, because I will not forgive myself, and and there is a question from someone who asked me to ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Can we feel guilty? No, can we feel ashamed of feeling guilty?
Mm-hmm.
Like the first feeling is, I did something wrong. And then immediately the second feeling is, I'm wrong. I'm bad. I'm feeling ashamed of it.
Right. Yes. Guilt and shame can get linked to each other. They're different. Shame is I am bad, and guilt is I did wrong. Right. So one is about behavior and the other is about identity. Shame is about identity and guilt is about behavior, but they can get linked up in that way. If I do wrong, I am a bad person, right? So I engage in a transgressive, guilty behavior. And then I believe that means I'm my essence, I am essentially bad. And certainly people who um, uh, are chronically doing wrong, transgressing, are likely to end up feeling I am bad, and often will defend against that. Will have parts who defend against that by denying it or um, rationalizing it or projecting it onto other people or whatever, because nobody can live happily and contentedly with an identity of I am bad and I am worthless, right? That drives a lot of very bad behavior on the part of protectors because they don't they it leads to suicide actually, and it's a life-threatening belief. So protective systems get into gear and will do all kinds of things to prevent somebody from feeling that about themselves. um, so it can get complicated,
It's
but
like
guilt, go ahead.
for example, I know I need to call this person,
Mhm.
but I really don't want to. But a part of me will feel really guilty. So, for example, I need to call a parent that is
All right, and you feel guilty, and
and
then
I feel guilty if I don't call that parent. And I will be kind of ashamed of myself if I will be like a kind of a bad girl if I will not do the right thing. So it's a
right.
guilt and shame kind of in one bowl,
Right.
right?
Well, you are guilty of not calling if you feel like you ought to, right? You have a part who says, no, no, you ought to do this, so you're guilty. And it wants you to feel guilty because it wants you to make that call, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's your conscience, it's gonna bother you and say, no, 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 you have to call, even if you don't want to. And there's another part who's kind of slamming on the brakes and saying, no, 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 I don't want to. I'm going to be shamed or whatever. I'm not liking this. I don't want to have that conversation. It's not fun for me. And then there's another part who comes in, and a critic who starts not just guilting, but shaming, saying, well, if you don't do it, you're a bad person or a bad daughter or a bad child. Um, and and starts, citing other instances in which you've been bad, right? So you've
Yes.
got a part who's trying to act as your conscience and get you to do something that some other part of you doesn't want to do for a reason. And you've got a part who starts to shame uh, the part who doesn't want to call and call that part names or say you're bad.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so you want to get in the middle of that and say, hold up, everybody. Can you, the part who's shaming, kind of dial it down for a minute? And can you, the part who's guilting, calm down for a minute? And let's talk to the part who doesn't want to make that phone call because there's a reason, and that part needs help. And we can't just ignore that or it'll blow up at some point. It already is blowing up. We need to help that part. And then we as a group need to make, what we'd call a self-led decision about how to manage this obligation with sort of the parents that we need to relate, we need to be in relationship, but we also need to be self-protective.
Yes.
So I, as the adult, am going to come in and you are not responsible for those phone calls. I'm going to do it. And we can talk about what's important, where it's important to set limits and where it's important to be generous and how to reinforce better behavior from the person who we don't want to talk to and, be skillful.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that and a lot of validation.
Yeah.
How the cycles that really drain us and drive us crazy on a daily basis work. That's very, very helpful. Martha,
But, but let me just say one thing about that, because the idea in IFS is to do what we call a U-turn, which means rather than either thinking I'm bad for not making this phone call, or that person is a pain and is not somebody who makes themselves someone I want to talk to, that they don't know how to engage in a positive relationship. Instead of going out there and thinking about those things, you say, well, let me take a look at what's happening inside of me, why I would dread this phone call, what's important about that, and what I can do to kind of bring the locus of control back to me in this situation and make it a more functional um, and situation, a better outcome for me and for the other person.
yes. Thank you for reminding about the U-turn. And I love in your book, um, when I read the interviews, it's all about U-turn, and it's so,
Right.
so powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah. It's it's the key to freedom.
Mm, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Martha, thank you so much for your time. It's so precious and valuable. Part of me feels like, wow, it's um it's it's a big privilege to talk to you and to learn from you. And I hope to learn from you many years forwards. Um,
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
yes, and at some point I probably will reach out to you when you have more time. I have a laundry list of so many really radically important topics that you raise in your work, and would be so important to hear from you. But
Yeah,
thank you for everything you shared.
happy to talk again anytime. Let
Oh,
me know.
thank you. Thank you, Martha.